Welcome to part 2 of this intro to the tonal black and white painting project. In the previous video, I went through and talked about things to consider when you're working on this project, things to look out for, how to be able to go into it, what are some of the big moments that we're trying to capture as we work on this rendering. Within this video, what I'm going to be doing is rendering 2 objects for you guys. The first is the classic circle example. There are hundreds of these on YouTube. I hope you enjoy mine. I hope I can add something to the conversation of how to be able to render a circle with some good lighting. And the second object that we're going to be doing is taking it up a notch and doing this weird abstract shape. I think this weird abstract shape here is going to give us a nice platform to be able to talk about how to be able to bend light, as well as get into this idea of ambient occlusion. Ambient occlusion is the idea that light particles, think of them as little beads, cannot penetrate into the cracks and crevices. And we're going to do some talking about how light moves around a surface. I also want to talk to you guys about the way that light dissipates on an object, the way that light interacts with hard edges versus soft edges. So that's what we've got going on right in the middle here, where we've got a hard edge that's going to transition into a soft edge within this object. Now, there's going to be some things that are missing from this example that I talk a lot about in the previous video. Namely, atmospheric perspective, the idea that values become less defined the further they get away from the canvas. So we can see this in the example objects over here, this sort of fog of war that's going on within both of these scenes, and how we're moving with the buildings in the background here to the deeper grays. Let me zoom in so I'm being decent for you guys. Yeah. So I know it's pixelated, but it still is a good example of showing you what I'm talking about. So as we move further away here, the contrast, right? We've got a lot of really deep blacks here going on, and the contrast with the sky that's becoming lighter as it moves further down is a lot less on the buildings. We're also losing detail as we move further away within this scene. This is a really, really important thing that you guys should be thinking about on this tonal black and white painting. And unfortunately, with these 2 very high school examples that I'm going to be doing here, it doesn't convey those ideas and some of the more complex stuff, as well as the 70-30 rule, which I talk a lot about in the previous video, for how to be able to compose your paintings, how to be able to let some things within your scenes and within your narrative illustrations disappear into the shadows, and to really think about where you're putting the brightest whites and the biggest highlights to draw the viewer's attention, and the most detail to draw the viewer's attention to the section of the painting that you want them to look at. So without further ado, let's get in here and start jamming on this circle. So I've got just a ellipse shape that I've created here by holding down Shift to make it perfect. And I'm just going to hold down the Control key on my keyboard to get inside of this ellipse and make sure that I'm painting just on the inside of it for right now. So I've got a perfect middle gray within my piece right now. That's the way that I like to start my backgrounds. I highly recommend within your own paintings that you start from a middle gray. Do not start on a white background. Do not start on a black background. Because from the middle gray, now I can push down into the shadows. A couple rules about color here. Excuse me. If you go all the way up to the brightest white within your piece, you have got nowhere else to be able to go. If you go all the way down to the blackest black, you run into the same problem. So right now we are right in the middle. And what I'm going to do for my first shadow pass on this circle is start thinking, just go down one step, right? We'll call that a step, about here to here. So I'm getting some shadow and value, but I've still got quite a few more steps that I can create. Let me back up before I start painting this circle. All right, let's talk about it. Let's figure out where the lighting is coming from within this scene. So this is going to be very important for your projects. I want you guys to think about the light source, how the light is dissipating within your shots, and the way that as objects get further away from the light, depending on the lumens within that light, the brightness, the amount of illumination on the objects is going to drop down within your scene. So for this circle, and within your own projects, please really think about where the lighting is coming from. So light setup. Let's just pick something. I'm feeling this this top left-hand side over here. We have the light of the sun. Okay, so this circle, traditionally with these, the light is kind of going to come and it's going to hit sort of on this side, and then we're going to see the dissipation. We're going to get a little bit of bounce lighting that's starting to go in within these. And what I want to do, just to be able to take it up a little bit of a notch and make your paintings more interesting, is think about secondary lighting within your scene as well. At that point, we're starting to get more into a photography mindset with the way that we're painting these. So what I'm going to do here is just add, we'll think of this as like a flashlight, okay? So there's our little flashlight. Let's give it a button back over here. Classic flashlight, 2 AA batteries. There we go. So this flashlight is going to be also on the back side of our scene. However, the brightness is not as bright. So let's say the sun is 1,000 lumens. It's actually a lot brighter than that. And we're going to say that this flashlight only has 200 lumens. So it is much, much dimmer than what we're seeing from our main light source. And this is a good way to be able to approach secondary lighting within your shots. All right, good. I'm recording. Sorry, I just wanted to make sure. I want to do this all over again. All right, so here we go. I'm holding down control, selecting my circle. And what I'm going to begin with here is, this is the project where, yeah, you can use the fuzzy brush, but if you only use the MB soft round brush, or from the general brushes, the soft round, you're going to be able to tell. So it works really well to be able to do, you know, let's go with the line art to give this thing, the line art brush to be able to give this a little bit of texture. I'm going to go back in to my middle gray, and then from there, I'm going to do one step down. The next thing that I want to do is make sure that my smoothing is turned on for this painting, even though I'm just doing a circle. I'm going to set my smoothing to 20%. After that, I'm going to turn the opacity of this brush down to like 38%. So under 50, 38 is a good starting point for it. I've got my 2 lighting zones for where the light's going to come from, and now I feel pretty confident that I can go in and start to render this painting. All right, so there we go. We're going to go in with our middle value and just start rocking and rolling here. Now, because it's Photoshop, since I'm doing 2 lines, that means that I get a darker line when I go back over it. So that's a little bit more than 30%. And I'm going to get a further darker line. Again, we want our light to be able to sort of hit right in this region. Is going to be our brightest spot on this. And it's going to dissipate as we start to move through the bottom of this sphere. I know I'm going to do shadows on the ground, don't worry. But I think that this example works well because all of a sudden we can start to see where the lighting is coming through and contrasting. So now I'm going to go through, this is my second pass over on this bottom section, and I'm just going to fill it in all the way. I'm starting to get some nice bands of texture and lighting as it starts to dissipate. And so let's go through here. And drop this off. All right, so this section where I'm drawing in this little squid-looking character, ghost-looking character, is where the least amount of light is going to hit on this ball. So for there, as well as the ground, but this is going to be a dark section. All right. So there we go. We've just gone through and created, I'm keeping in mind my 200 lumens section. Over on the left-hand side, you can see that that does have some shading to it. It is not the super bright middle gray that we're looking at here. We've still got a lot of room to go a lot darker. And you can see how much value I've been able to create just from using one step down on my brush. This is the power of this project. So from here, I've got two options. I can go through and I can use my smudge tool. We haven't really used the smudge tool too much. I've got the smudge tool turned on to the chip brush right now, which works pretty well for me. Let's see if I can find another one that works really well. Yeah, that'll do. All right, so this is the rough skin brush turned on for the smudge tool. I'm getting away from using the smudge tools, just out of the package setting. And so now what I can do is start to think about these edges. This is a perfect sphere that we're working with, but we're still going to have some nice gradient that we need to be able to create. This is where, you know, Photoshop could do a little bit better. You know, every update, Photoshop is always at their big convention, the big jamboree is always talking about photographers. They never talk about all the thousands and thousands of digital artists in the world that use this program as their primary means to create media for movies, animated TV shows, films. Like, come on, Photoshop, update those brushes. All right, so I'm taking my skin tool and I'm just gonna go over this. You know, notice that I'm using a wiggle motion all the way through. If you set your Photoshop DPI to like 300 and you're working in a 20 by 20 canvas, making it larger, you are going to find that it becomes really, really slow as you start to soften the stuff up, and you end up waiting. So you make your actions and you watch Photoshop try and catch up. It does a pretty good job of not lagging out and forgetting what it is that it's supposed to be doing. It just takes a second. Okay. Go. Am I happy with these shapes? Not entirely. That's starting to look a little bit like an oil spill. Finish itself up. But this is a very necessary step for the polishing process. I'm just softening my edges within any type of digital painting. You cannot get away with just going through and using that fuzzy brush right off the bat. You want to go in and you want to soften things. I'm going to undo that. Just trying to get to my brush. Hit B. Soft around. And there we go. Using that to be able to polish up just at the end if there's some sections that I'm not really happy with. All right, so now we're starting to create something that looks quite a bit more like a cue ball. Still like this rough feathered edge, and I just want to let that dissipate down on the back end just a little bit more. Maybe I'm back to my middle gray. I can start to soften. Still at 38%. Some of the shading over here, thinking about the lumens. There we go. Give it just a little bit over on that side. All right, so that's feeling pretty good to me. Now I'm going to go through, give myself a new layer that I've done my first shadow pass on this. I could go into the highlights here, but I want to go deeper with my shadows and get those more corrected. So I'm going to do a second pass with the shadows on a new layer now, so that I'm working non-destructively and not getting too far into this to where I can't go back and correct myself if I mess something up. Just good Photoshop working methods. All right. Sorry, trying to find my brush that I want. All right. MB line art. So I've gone down another step within my color. Ooh, look at that. Inky and oily. Love the way that it kind of draws in the pattern here just a little bit. So we said that's going to be my darkest area within my drawing and within my painting of this sphere. And so now I'm just working within the deepest shadow area on this. This is still far from the blackest black that we're able to create. After this, I'm going to repeat the process, use my smudge brush again. This way I'm sort of softening the edges, and this is going to allow you to be able to do a smudge brush pass to where we are really focusing on the shape that I'm creating. I feel like if you just use the soft brush, that we don't think about the shapes as much, and I really like these little areas of light that are starting to get into our shadow region so that it's not just a flat color. And that's feeling pretty cool to me. So I'm going to do the same thing now where I take that same color. Let's go back in, just a quick shadow pass. Yep, you turn it down, the opacity's up to 100. That's my problem with that. There we go. And softening this section out. Let's give it just a little bit more push and pull. And I like those shadow bits that are in there. So I'm gonna leave them just a little bit, but quite all the way. All right, there we go. So now we're starting to get a pretty good cue ball looking piece. I think we're in a good section now to start moving into our highlights. So for the highlights, I've just hit I on my keyboard to select my middle gray again. And now I'm gonna do one step up on the cue ball. From here, I'm going to go back in. Same thing, you guys. You're starting to see a pattern here where I'm using my rough brush. Let's bring it down to 30%, 30, 40%. And now I can start on a new layer, painting in those highlights. So I'm thinking about the light, right? Where is the light hitting the most? Really kind of on the edge here is where I imagine it. And from that point forward, that light is going to start to dissipate out across this sphere. So one of the things you might notice is that I'm not just painting big old streaks at this point. I'm trying to go in and paint a little bit more controlled within this area. So I'm getting a little bit of texture, and there's still a rhythm and a balance to the way that I'm creating my lighting. With our little 200 lumen guy over here, I'm going to give him a little bit of lighting as well over on this backside. Not too much, just a little bit. It starts to dissipate. All right. So from here, we've got it nice and rough at the beginning, and this is just like as if you were using charcoal. And then you go in and you smudge the charcoal to be able to soften it up. Pretty good. And we're describing some type of texture on our sphere so that it's not perfectly round within this example. And I'm just left and righting cue ball. Now, if I want to, I can go in and use that soft brush again. I'm going to go even lower now that we're doing the highlights. Make it huge. Just turn up the illumination on all this stuff. There we go. So our shadow is still there. It's still working. Got a little bit of illumination over on this side, and we can see how much that illumination really affects this sphere just by going up a couple steps, right? This is why we like to do the shadows first and then move into our highlights. So I'm going to go back, grab that highlight that I was just doing. Still got plenty of room, and I'm going to go, shoot, let's be bold and go all the way up to the top. Normally, if I was doing this painting, I might do one more step. So 3 steps down, 3 steps up between the shadows and then the highlights from the middle gray is the way that I like to work. And last but not least, for our highlights, I'm going to go in and I'm going to do these shadows on the ground. I want to talk to you guys about bounce lighting and all that good stuff as well. That brush is up to 100%. Again, let's turn it down 40 so that I can build into those super whites. So again, this is the area that I'm going to keep coming back to and working from. And that is pure white now. I've got nowhere else to be able to go after this. So I don't want to add too much of it, but I want it to dissipate as we move further out and around. Same thing for this guy, maybe just a little bit of lighting, rim lighting, really important technique to be aware of on the edge. Now, from this, same deal. I'm going to go in and I'm going to smooth it up a little bit, though you can see how much less of that super bright white I'm using. And I'm going to leave it a little textured still on my piece. And this is the cool part about working this way, so that I'm painting this stuff in rough and then softening. so that I can make the decision about how much of it I want to leave there. And it's just giving me another moment with each one of these shapes that I've created. There we go. That's feeling pretty good. Let's off click it and turn off the ellipse. All right, pretty decent looking sphere. Maybe could be a little bit better, but onwards and upwards. From this stage, I'm going to go through and I'm going to grab that middle gray that I was just using for my shadow. And now we've got a light coming on over here, meaning that we are going to get some shadow that's going to be cast. However, it's not going to be very long. We've got our 1,000 lumens that's coming down. So we're going to get another shadow that's going to be quite a bit longer and elongated. And there we go. That's going to be my shadow shapes for this piece. Now, I've started off soft enough with the brush at 40%. And I want to show you guys some stuff. Let me give you some teaching here. So there's a shadow. Where our two shadows overlap is going to be good and dark. That's going to be a dark section. We're also going to have quite a bit of darkness that starts to come out of this shape. But that shadow, I'm going to go down to my full black now, is going to dissipate the further it gets away from the object. All right, this is our first rule of ambient occlusion. So right around the base of this guy, we're going to use our super black where the light can't really penetrate and can't really get to. So that's the only spot on this piece that I've used the super black up until this point. Still at 40% on my brush, so I've got a little bit of leeway to be able to build out into this. And that black is going to dissipate and get some light in it pretty fast. But this idea that the shadows, right, have got tone and value to them as well is very, very important. So we've got a longer shadow being cast from the brighter light that is going to dissipate. I haven't used the smudge brush yet, but this is going to be a much softer edge on this shadow in the background. And this is going to be, really, really blurry here since this is not a very bright light and it's also being interacted with by the super bright sun. Let's see how this looks when we start to use the smudge tool on it. So first, I'm just going to work my edges. And I'm just using a little tracing back over my lines with a quick left and right. All right, now let's go on this guy. Smudging him up at first, just like charcoal. And now I'm going to push him quite a bit further. Make it lighter. Okay, pretty good. Go in here, soften these guys up. And now let's just soften up some of that roughness that I was creating. There we go. All right, so now we've got a very interesting, well-considered shadow mark. Last thing that you might want to do for this is do a subtractive approach. So I've got my eraser turned onto the fuzzy brush. I'm going to turn my eraser down to like 24%. And now watch this. Where's the edge of that shadow? It's just a little bit of it left. Maybe there's a little bit more light that's starting to creep around on that edge. Maybe a little bit of the light is starting to come in from our fuzzy brush, or sorry, our flashlight over here on this side. And bam, before you know it, we have got something that is really starting to look very realistic. Now, last thing that we can do is start to think about with this sphere example. We've got some interesting texture. We've got some secondary lighting going on to this piece. Maybe there's a little bit more that I could do with the rim lighting around the outside of this sphere, especially down in this area. I think there is. But for the sake of this demo, And trying to keep it quick for you, I want to show you that we can go through and we can add bounce lighting. So bounce lighting is the idea. Turn this all the way up so you guys can see what I'm about to do. Is that our lumens from the sun are going to come down, they're going to hit the ground, and those little beads of light are going to start to bounce off the ground and hit our sphere. Now, every time, just like the bouncing ball project within animation, every time they hit the ground, a lot of them are going to get soaked up. There's a whole lot less of them that are going to get bounced off of the ground and back up onto our sphere, yet it does happen. And this is something to consider if you're trying to paint a metallic surface, something that's got more sheen or shine to it, is how much of that bounce lighting is going to be picked up on your object. So what I'm going to do here, I'm at 100%. I don't want that. I'm on a fresh layer as well. Let's turn it down to like 15%. And I'm thinking about the sphere. And there we go. So that is going to be my bounce lighting. And dissipate. So we move further down. And round itself off. There we go. That's feeling pretty good. Last thing that I want to do with that is start to drop it down quite a bit. I can play with my opacity. This is another great part about digital painting. You can also play with the layer interpretation of it. That's giving me a color. I don't want that. There you go. That's feeling pretty good. Okay, so now we've got a sphere that we just painted. There's likely a little bit of black stuff that's going on down at the bottom there. So I'm going to do one more little pass for my cleanup to make sure that this stuff is looking and feeling right. So same deal. I should get back on my fuzzy brush. Opacity 15%. I don't know why. There we go. Now we're really grounding it, which is going to help. And I still want just a little bit of a line down on the edge. All right, that's going to help it. Give it a little bit more rim lighting just to be able to define it where it's disappearing up in this section. There we go. That's starting to give us just a little bit better of a shape. So now we've got a sphere painted. Congratulations. I hope this was helpful for you guys. Just a lot of good basic information here for thinking about lumens, secondary lighting, shadows. It's a good base project. Okay. Let's go on to our secondary shape now. You thought that last one was fun. All right, check this out. So let's do lighting coming from a different direction this time. And let's say that we've got a light that's coming sort of from over here. So I want the light rays to be able to hit and move all the way through this object where the darkest portion of it is down in this area. And we're really not going to see a whole lot of shading over on this either. But I think this will give us some kind of cool shadows along the way. I hope that makes sense for you guys as we get into this second object. To add a secondary light to it, where would that be interesting? Let's do another one that's coming from where the audience is looking at. So here's our little flashlight. And we'll do it right on this corner. and have it dissipate so that we'll still get a little bit of brightness, a little bit of illumination. Again, this is going to be 200. This is going to be 1000. So this is much brighter. And I've got my shape already drawn out. But you saw in the last one how, I used the line work, the sketch at the beginning to block in the shape, but I'm not restricted to just the line. So let me go ahead and grab the interior of this shape. And we're going to start making some choices. So grabbing my middle gray again, and I'm going to do that one step down. You're going to start to see a lot of these shapes and choices that are repeated throughout this process. Okay. So now we've got the MB Line Art Rough Brush again. I'm going to turn the opacity down to like 35, 40%. And now we can just go ahead and start making some big decisions. So the first thing that I know here is that there is going to be a little bit of a shadow that starts to grow within this section, right? The light is going to hit, but it's not going to be able to make its way all the way down within this part. This is that ambient occlusion where the light particles just cannot quite seem to reach to. This part over here, we might go back and add a little bit of lighting later on, but for the most part, with the light coming behind this object, this is not going to be illuminated. So I'm just making some big decisions on my shadows at first. Okay. Now for this section, I'm glad that we've got this piece. We're going to have the light start to hit here. So it's going to become brighter, but the light can't quite penetrate to the back of this corner, even with our example. This is going to become darker. And we're going to have a gradient that exists all the way across this shape. Lift it up with a brush. So don't worry about it too much if you get some extra brush strokes or your tones aren't laid out entirely perfect right away. This is a rounded shape, by the way, so I want to describe that. Okay. And we're going to have our tones get brighter as it moves forward. And this guy, we're going to do some interesting stuff there. Really no light here. We start to get to this section. All right, and now this piece, there's going to be a little bit of shadow that starts to build here as we get into the roundness of this lip. Think of it as sort of a half pipe or a quarter pipe, and then it's going to get brighter as it moves away. That's a little bit back further to the sun, and there we go. So that is my first shadow pass on this object. A lot of different planes, a lot of different looks, but as I'm working through it, that's the cool thing about doing this sort of half step with the shadows and with the values at the beginning is that while I'm doing this, I've never rendered this thing before. I just made it up before I started this video tonight. So I'm having to do the thinking in real time while I'm doing these shadows. And I'm making decisions based on the way my brain knows that light works. And I'm exploring it. I'm thinking about it. I'm making some choices along the way here for where those light particles are going to pool. Sorry, making some more choices. All right. So on this pass, I think I'm in a pretty good position, but I want to continue to paint rough. So I'm going to go into my next pass on this thing with a darker color. So I'm going to grab my one step down gray, and I'm going to go down another step. And let's start making some decisions on the same layer. I know, bold moves, being bold right now. I feel like I'm good and warmed up at this point. All right, so we know that the light's not going to hit there. I know that's going to be one of my darkest regions within this painting. The next thing that I know is that light has trouble making it into these corners. We go ahead and get that nice and dark. Now you can see the way that I'm drawing is not very painterly. I'm really treating this brush right now as if it's a pencil with the way that I'm laying down my line work. And that's okay. You can totally think of it as a pencil while you're working. There we go. And again, I want this to be a little bit round this side. That's going to have a lot of high contrast. And then we're also going to do the shadows on this as well. This is going to be a little bit further away. I'm using the brackets to be able to but I know that the light has trouble getting to the ground. All right. Into those corners, and we are creating a corner between the bottom of this piece and the ground. All right. This is a corner. Let's make that a nice hard edge. Still got the roundness from the flashlight that's appearing here. And now that I'm not working with total black, that edge in there. All right. So that's working pretty well for me for my shadow pass. At this point, I'm going to create a new layer and let's start working into the highlights. Let me turn off the selector so that you guys can see it. So that's my second pass within this sheet. And I've learned, or within this shape. So I've learned a lot about this object from my shadow pass. To be able to learn more about this object and to really describe the form that I'm trying to paint, I need to go in and I need to add some highlights. I haven't smoothed everything out along the way yet because my highlights are going to also teach me a lot about this shape while I'm discovering it. Okay, so I'm going to go in, select my objects again. I could do just this portion, but I'm painting fairly clean right now, and I think I can get away with it. So here we are. I've got from my middle gray, I've done one sort of mini step up. So again, there's my middle gray, and I'm sort of just stepping 1/3 of the way up towards my white. My value is set to 35%. I have a smoothing on. Oh, shame on me. 20%. Come on, buddy. And now I'm going to go in and start establishing right from the get-go here. Let's turn it up a little bit more so I'm not breaking my finger off. What the brightest portion of this piece is going to be. So we've got this lip here that's pretty hard. And that's going to dissipate pretty quick as the shadows start to appear. This lip is really catching a whole bunch of the light as well, right in this section. And that's going to dissipate. So I'm just sort of painting, drawing it out. We're going to get a good amount of light going through here, but not quite as much because we want to think about how that light is dissipating. So this is still going to be bright, but you can see that I am painting a gradient in here. Light's still going to be able to penetrate in there, but we need a little bit of a shadow. And I'm really controlling that gradient, which is something that you just can't do as well with the fuzzy brush. This is going to have a little bit of white mixed into it down here as we get into that recess. And this is going to have a really bright light around the top edge. So that's starting to look pretty good. I think I can go a little bit less with the white, and let's really get over this entire thing for down there. Some of that brightness going in. Painting half pipes with Wilmer Ritz. All right, so that's feeling pretty good to me. For my bright zone, I'm going to go in and I'm going to highlight all that stuff more later on. I'm down to 19% on my brush. I know that is a good path forward. I'm going back up to 40% so that I can step my way into my highlights. So this is the round portion of this thing. So I know that this is going to get a nice, smooth, big, soft highlight on it because it's rounded. And as we start to move more into the harder shape, get a little bit of the highlight right here. It's going to move back. Okay. So nice and soft as we move away. And that highlight is going to start to pick up on the brightness from our little flashlight here. So I've still got a lot of room to go brighter within this piece. Here we go. And just doing these wispy little hairs to be able to lightly mix it. Oh boy, we're starting to get something going on. All right, so for this one, we've got that same brightness on the back edge. The light's going to run itself just up that edge just a little bit. And here we go. So I'm going to dissipate it, going back, starting to mix with smaller strokes into that gradient back there. Get some of our bright highlight going almost to the ground. But again, there's going to be a little bit of a lip. And there it is. So there's our first highlight pass. Looking pretty good, looking pretty realistic. When it comes to this piece, maybe I could add just a little bit of highlight right in this section, as if that light has got just a little bit of lumens that are creeping into these parts. I don't want to overdo it though. And then this is going to have even less because it's moving further away. There we go. All right, so this is the cool part now that I've done my first highlight pass on this piece. When I turn it off, you can see where we were before. Holy jam, right? So we start off with absolutely nothing, 2 shadow passes, and now you can see how much more defined the shape and form of this object is after going through and adding those highlights on there. It makes all the difference in the entire world, right? Bam, massive difference. Now we can really start to see a lot of those shapes starting to appear. Wish I'd done this without the outlines, but that's okay. So now I'm in a really good spot to be able to go in and start doing one more highlight pass on this piece. And I'm going to do this with on a new layer, so I'm still not working destructively. There's how bright I am, and you can see how far away I am from the white. So I'm not going to go full tilt white on this one like I did with the sphere. I want to take it a little bit slower, but I've still got my areas where I know that brightness is going to be. So I'm working at 40%. And I'm going to lessen my brush strokes as I move back. Same thing, really a nice bright highlight right here on this lip. There's going to be quite a few, a little bit less of them. This area. Whew. And now, really bright highlight. And up here. And so let's go in and that rounded curve. Give it a nice bright highlight. Soften it up as it goes back and away. And down here, around these edges. Just quick little strokes pulling in and dabbing in. Notice that I'm also with this textured brush and this technique building in a really rough, almost cement texture on this material. And, you know, I haven't used the smudge brush at all. I'm painting in and layering up my textures with this one. That's looking and feeling pretty good to me for an overall highlight. It's pretty rough. It's pretty interesting. At this stage, you know, if you still want to work non-destructively, you can merge all your layers. I just shift selected them. So I select the top one, hold down shift and hit Control E to be able to merge my layers together. I'm going to grab my selection marquee, hit Control C. Now I'm going to do Control Z so that the layers are separated back out again, and hit Control Shift V over the top. I can hide those previous layers, and now, bam, I've got everything there all together on one layer so that I can very easily start to make some choices on these textures that I've created. Maybe there's some areas of this that I want to clean up that don't need those lines in those regions. And so now the smudge tool allows me to be able to go back and say, okay, what are the areas that I really want the viewer to focus on, right? Maybe this transition is a little bit harder than it needed to be. And this starts to become very, very much like painting and rendering with charcoal. That area not feeling quite as round as it should, so I can soften that up. Maybe a little bit more work that I can do there. These highlights are going to be a lot less prominent since they're further away. And then these guys, I really want all of that to disappear. It's so far away. Again, the further away it gets, the less detail it's going to have. Right. So there's probably a few more steps and stages that I can take this piece through. I like the roughness down here on the backside, so I'm gonna leave a little bit of it, but I'm using the smudge brush just to be able to soften those shapes. Same thing with all these white highlights here. They're cool. They look good before. We'll do a turn on, turn off with this step as well, so you can get an idea of why I'm doing this. And now I'm just sort of choosing what areas leave soft and leave hard. Okay, so that's feeling quite a bit better. This area, again, I know that it's a really, really smooth curve. So I want to soften up that transition. There we go. Softer. Bring this up at the top. There's still a little bit of the brush stroke and work that I'm leaving within these. And I'm softening it by half. I hope that you guys can see this and understand. All right. There we go. So I'm going to merge those three guys together. Let me turn them all on, merge. So this is what it looked like beforehand. Okay. And then this is after I do my softening pass on it. So softer, harder. See, a lot of the marks and stroke making is still there. Some of this stuff is a little bit sloppy. Um, doesn't look or feel intentional, and just that pass through this to be able to get rid of some of those markings really does wonders to be able to soften up the overall piece. What I'm going to do next is let's go in, and I feel like maybe I can go deeper with some of the blacks, but I want to be very, very soft with this. Okay, so I've got the majority of this piece solved for and figured out. And so now I'm going to use, finally, at the very, very end, only at the end, that smudge brush, just to be able to, or sorry, the soft brush, to be able to make some choices. So I'm working over all of my previous layers. And I'm just making a highlight a little bit more dramatic. And of course, this piece where the light does not go. All right, there we go. So you'll see how the soft brush at the very end, sorry, this one just a little bit darker. There we go. Is going to help. So watch when I turn this one on and off. So that's with it off. And there's just one more final sort of shadow pass there. I could go through and brighten up the highlights a little bit more if I need to. With that, I can use the dodge tool, which is going to line things. So maybe this entire piece right here, I feel like needs to get just a little bit more light right up at the top since it's the closest to the sun. That's brighter. This is not as bright. I can use the burn tool to be able to darken some things. And these are really good for polish right at the very end. But we've got a pretty reasonable rendering pass that's happening on this odd object. Final thing is the shadow to be able to ground it. So same deal with the shadow. Let me go back in. I'm going to paint that guy first, rough. Notice how little I'm really using the soft brush when I do these paintings. Pretty dark, the color that I'm using. And our piece is not entirely opaque, but that's okay. So here we go. And it'll have just the regular square top on it. That's fine by me. Make that shadow really, really dark right around the edges of this piece. Using my eraser, nothing fancy. Go. And that looks like a weird pattern on your family's couch that lives in Arizona. So let's go in with the smudge brush and get rid of some of those lines that are in there. We can also grab our middle gray tone and paint back over some of this stuff to be able to soften it. So we're giving it a nice hard edge along the side here. And then the shadow is going to dissipate. So we're going to use that same eraser technique that we used on the sphere. There we go. Shadow's looking softer, but it needs to be quite a bit more soft. So right now my eraser is at 100%. I'll turn that down to 50. I hit E on the keyboard to get to the eraser really fast. There we go. So let's dissipate that. And yeah, that all is feeling pretty good, but we still got this light, right? And so that light is going to be creating a circular shape onto our piece, and it is going to influence the shadow. So let's go in and let's drop out that shadow even more here. And any other things I want to do with this light? Maybe use that burn tool one more time, just to be able to bring the shadow colors darker as we get up right next to the piece where the light cannot go. And yeah, let's turn off the sun and the moon here. There we go. We've got a pretty cool, pretty interesting example of how to be able to do a non-traditional form that has some curves, some round edges, some sharp edges, some scalloped regions in it. And I hope that that's useful for you guys when you're thinking about how light moves around an object and what it is that you're creating. We have two different examples for the amount of light that's coming into the space. Primary light and then a secondary light. This is a very much a photography way to think about lighting. It's never going to hurt you. It's always going to look pretty good within your scenes whenever you do this. Please, as you move into these black and white tonal paintings, think about the way from your light source, light is dissipating into your scene and into the objects that you're rendering on. If you've got a street lamp, if you've got a exit sign, an overhead light, a neon light, things are going, the lumens aren't going to be as strong as the sun. They're not going to provide global illumination, and it's going to start to dissipate. Fog is also a really good tool for this upcoming project as you guys start to paint in there. And I hope that these two demos have given you guys some things to think about when it comes to shading. There, you can also do the more cell shading style. Not on this project, please keep this rendering as realistic and soft as you can. and your paintings will be better for it. It's an important step to take to start working on these things. So thank you so much for hearing me out tonight and checking out this demo. I can't wait to show you guys the next one as I start to go in and develop this painting and really get into the guts of painting tonally. There's a lot of reference videos within the module description. I recommend that you watch those, and hopefully those will fill you in a little bit more. All right. You guys have a great evening, and thank you so much.